There's a comment on Zoom saying that I might be Batman, apparently. Apparently my voice isn't quite normal. Anyway, it's better than last week, I can assure you. So the last 3 months, 11 sermons, a number of them done by me, a couple by Naomi, one by Malcolm. We've been exploring this series called Dust, the art of followership. And in a minute, Naomi's gonna just lead some open mic opportunity for us to kind of reflect together, bring some different kind of contributions. But before we do that, if you're just here for the first time, we're going to maybe just have a brief kind of conversation between the three of us. I'm going to ask Naomi and Joy just a couple of questions. And we've covered a lot of material, so we're not going to summarize everything, but maybe just try and capture the heart of what we've been talking about in a little bit of just conversation between us for a few minutes and then open up the mic. So, Naomi, perhaps I could just turn to you just because I suppose Dust was very much probably a lot of what I'd felt stirring. We'd talked about it as a leadership team, but you were on maternity leave when we first started kind of talking about all of this, and then we've had some conversations as we've shaped this series, and you've helped. This is part of what you do in the leadership team of shaping some of the sermon series. So I appreciate partly it's come from me, but you've also shaped it and contributed. So tell us a little bit from your perspective. What's been the heart of this series? What would you say is the kind of high-level summary or the heart of what we've been trying to do here?
I think probably the one quote that has stuck with me from the whole series is when you said, Jesus makes a terrible hobby. And that really lodged in my brain. And I think there is a temptation, isn't there, to try and do a little bit of Jesus. We'll do a little bit of this Christian thing. Or we might try and do a lot of this Christian thing, fitting around all of the other things that we want to do with our lives. But actually, that leaves us really exhausted and tired and frazzled and like we're not doing well enough and maybe God's disappointed in us. There's all of that stuff that comes with trying to fit Jesus around everything else. And actually Jesus' invitation is, no, leave everything.
Yes.
Leave absolutely everything. Come and follow me and trust that I will help you with the rest of it if that's what you put first. And that there is rest in that is an easy yoke, and trusting that is good for us. That is the fully alive life. We talk around here sometimes about we want to see people fully alive, and fully aliveness comes from leaving everything behind.
That's such a brilliant summary, and I love that. What then are some of the implications of that from your point of view?
I think one of the main implications is we have to be really intentional about it, and that isn't just a one-off decision. I mean, many of us will have made one-off decisions for Jesus, and that can be really powerful and important, but actually, if we are not continually bringing that as our priority, other stuff will just crowd in. Yes. And I was in my garden a couple of weeks ago, and I'm a bit of a reluctant, I enjoy gardening, but I don't know what I'm doing. And I have this fear that I'm going to kill something. You know, like if I do too much gardening, then everything in my garden will die. And we've got this really lovely magnolia tree in the corner of our garden. And I went out the other day and realized this ivy was strangling this magnolia tree because I hadn't been pruning the ivy. And I realized that this ivy is going to keep growing whether or not I do anything about it. And actually, maybe something will die if I just sit and wait to know what I'm doing and wait to have it all sorted and wait to know exactly the right thing to do. And so some of our intentionality is, I think, is what you've been saying about practices, is you've just got to do something. You can't just learn about it. We can't just think about following Jesus, although thinking is important. we need to do it, because otherwise all these other things will grow, and maybe something really important to us will die in that process.
And I think that I love that image. I think that's really helpful, and it kind of connects with some of what we've been talking about unintentional spiritual formation, that we are formed and shaped just by breathing and being involved in the world. And some of that's fine, and some of that is really deeply unhelpful because of the culture or the relationships or the things that the stories that we hear. And it's a bit like that ivy kind of growing around the tree, and we've got to do something that's really intentional. And I suppose what's really struck me, I think, in our kind of church culture is that often we've gone, well, I just want to do what feels right, feels authentic, that I feel like the Spirit's saying. And there's something that's right about that. But also, if there isn't something that sometimes feels a bit uncomfortable and feels a bit more of a choice, then we can just let that ivy kind of strangle the life out of it. Is there anything else that you want to say? I'm going to ask Joy a question in a minute, and then you might come back in a minute. Okay. So Joy, as you've hosted a number of these, and I keep saying, I'm only going to be 30 minutes, and then end up being 32.
45.
It was 38 on Sunday, and I said I was going to be 30, and I'm so sorry. And then I had to rush away because I was catching a train. So I just left you and Malcolm just leading the meeting at the end. So have you listened to a number of these? What sort of struck you? What do you feel has really become kind of front and center for either you personally or for us as a church?
I should say I've also been with the growth group looking at Invitation to a Journey, a book by Robert Mulholland, I'm going to go for.
Yes, Robert Mulholland.
And so that's also been shaping some of my thinking, which has been really helpful to have that conversation each week. One of the things that has sat with me is the training, not trying, yes. And how often I go through or have tried in my spiritual life to try really hard, and then when I don't get the outcome that I expect or desire or hope for, I'm like, well, that's clearly not working. Either God's let me down or I'm not doing it right. I'm going to give up. And so to have a sense of actually, and for me, I've done a lot of sport in my life. So training is something I'm very comfortable with. You put in the hard times in the gym or practicing a certain move. I used to play rugby, and I used to just practice jumping in a line out by myself in a field a lot of times. On a very dark Wednesday night, everyone else had gone into the clubhouse, and I would stay out and I would jump a lot of times. And the interesting thing, Toby's laughing at me, that's fair enough. You're a musician, Toby, you get this. The interesting thing was the coaches saying after a number of weeks, your jumping's actually really improved, Joy. And I'm like, I haven't noticed a difference. They've told me to do this. It's a discipline. I believe them. I trust them. And they're like, oh, it's made a difference. Shall I tell? I'm going to tell you a story because it's kind of fun, which is my first moment on an international rugby pitch was against Wales in the Six Nations. I come on as a substitute, and it's a line out. And I'm like, okay, this is kind of a big deal. And it's a Welsh line out. I'm sorry if anyone doesn't play rugby or know about rugby. It's the Welsh line out, and I just go up, challenge for the ball. I jump for it because why not? And incredibly, I catch it like it's thrown to me. Now, anyone who watches rugby, like this doesn't happen for somebody else's in the opposite team's line out. This shouldn't happen. It honestly looks like it's our ball. It's been thrown straight to me. And I'm up there, and I'm like, what do I do now? And thankfully, my clubmate has come on at the same time as the scrum half, and she's like, just throw it to me. But anyway, it's kind of so I pass it to her, and we don't score it, but, it's kind of a significant moment in my journey as an athlete. So anyone who's playing rugby is nodding, or knows about rugby is nodding. Everyone else is going past you. I apologize. But it's just interesting that training then resulted in this outcome that I could not have predicted in a million years. And it feels like that with my relationship with God. I've not caught the line out, stolen a line out from an opposition team just yet. But I'm feeling relieved that I'm not in control of my spiritual journey.
Yes.
I'm not in control of the outcome. What I am trying to take more ownership of is the input, the training, which for me is learning how to be still, to be quiet, to sit and to listen.
Yes.
Not as an active doer. That's the hard yards for me. That's the upstream practice you were talking about.
Yes.
The downstream practices, we were talking about this in our growth group, like it's the things you don't even know that you're good at.
Yes.
And so some people are like, I don't know what my downstream practices are. And I'm like, I can tell you what you're, because you do them, like you do them every week. And so like sometimes it's hard for us to recognize what's the stretch for us, what's the thing God is inviting us to do that's not so easy. And for me, that's bringing space and peace. Probably peace is the main. If I'm like thinking about the analogy, the catch and the line out, the outcome is a sense of peace that I haven't had probably for a lot of the last 2 years. And it's really significant for me personally, and I think in our family as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I love that rugby story because, in a sense, the hours on the field on your own prepared you for that moment when you came on in the line out. And I think there's been a massive shift for me in some of my practices where I've sometimes come away going, oh, well, that didn't really work, did it? And I didn't hear God, or I didn't feel the Spirit, or I read the scriptures and nothing really happened. And actually, I've just come to a place where I go, that doesn't matter. I'm not in the least bit interested around that, because it's just jumping on my own in the field. But it's all the training. If I keep doing this again and again and again, something works inside me that when that moment comes, and I'm looking for that place of peace or centeredness or whatever it is, I'm ready for it. And that has been such a significant shift for me in the way that I engage with some spiritual practices. Thank you so much, Joy. Naomi, I'm wondering if now is a good moment just to throw this open. Do you want to just lead this bit through?
Yeah, so we're going to take maybe around 20 minutes, depending on how many responses we get, to hear from one another about our journey over the last few months with this series, maybe with a growth group. I know there's been a couple that have followed this series in your own discipleship. And in a minute, we'll take just a couple of minutes to reflect. I know we put this in the newsletter, so you may have come with something prepared, and it would be great to hear that. I was just thinking there, and I'm going to slightly butcher this story because I can't remember the details, but I'm going to share it anyway. I remember reading a story once about a journalist that went to see a famous ballerina train, and she was doing her practice on the stage. And when she'd finished, he went up to her afterwards and said, "Oh, that was amazing. Could you tell me about it? Could you tell me what you were dancing about?" And she looked at him incredulously and said, "Well, if I could do that, then I wouldn't have to dance it." And it's this idea that there are some things that we tell stories about, and there are some things that are best communicated through art or through poetry or through dance or through another medium. So I think that's partly why we wanted to open this up a little bit, to say if you want to bring something that's maybe a bit less conventional, then that's also really welcome. So we'll take a couple of minutes just now to reflect on these last few months, on your journey in the last few months. And then I've got a poem that I'm going to read, and then I'd really love some other people to come and join me. Otherwise, I'm just going to have to chat for another 20 minutes, and I'm not sure I could do that as an introvert.
We'll just do another sermon.
Or just another impromptu sermon.
No.
I don't think sermons are meant to be used as a threat, Rupert. I think I take issue with that. So let's just take a minute to take some silence and just notice what comes up for you as you think about this sermon series and about your own discipleship in the last few months. And then I'll kick us off. So this is called Collecting Maps. They have their own shelf, neatly folded, colour-coded, routes prescribed in pencil. Perhaps one day, when all's in order, I'll dare to step inside them. For these tidy pages cannot replace the chalky taste, the gritty eyes, the rhythmic thud of soles on gravel. Walking, dancing, playing, resting, attending to faithfulness. Until rightness bows to goodness, connection dwarfs control, and my too much and not enoughness swirls into acceptance. Good news. I've sold everything for a plot of dirt and found that I am treasured. So you might have something prepared, or it might be something that's come to you as we've sat together this morning. But the microphone is here, and I think there's something on. I can't actually read this.
I can read it.
Thanks, Rupert.
Shall I do this?
Yeah,
as a
why don't you
starter,
open up
otherwise,
with Alison's?
So it's from Alison Walker. For me, the most helpful thing, says Alison, I take away is Rupert's thing about process moments and aha moments. The process moments are unremarkable and happen most of the time. And you can think there is no change and nothing is happening, but they're building up and changing you, and eventually you get an aha moment of realizing change and to step up to a higher level. It's not about losing heart in the process, but trusting it and keeping turning up. There is another milepost ahead, but you don't see it for most of your journeying towards it. But you know it's there ahead, you just need to keep walking. This was really useful as I went to a growth group and I felt I got nothing from it. In the past, I would have been perplexed and fretted over why, but this time, I turned up, and that's what was needed. Excellent.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Alison. I'm really struck by the power of just turning up. And maybe a lot of our life is, or a lot of our spiritual formation is just turning up. And that shapes and that forms us. And we want to know from the beginning where it's going to take us and what the milestone is, but we don't always get to see that. Thank you, Alison.
There's a queue. I think, Stefan, you're the front just by... Yeah, exactly.
I sat there on purpose. I'm reminded of a song that I heard when I went to a meeting of, I think it was a Slovak group in one of the Catholic churches in town. I see you, and I know you, and I love you through and through. I see you, and I know you, and I love you through and through. And it is this, that because Jesus loves me, he can't leave me the way I am. He has to change me. He has to ask me to move. He has to, he loves me so much that he can't leave me the way I am. And that is, to an extent, I think, what this is about. It's not out of hatred or you can't do or it's not good enough or whatever, but it is out of this love and this knowledge and the seeing me, the being present with me. Anyway, that's what it's for me.
Thank you, Stefan. And that makes all the difference, that it's not being beaten over the head because we're not good enough, but it is change and transformation in that space of being known. Thank you. Yeah, Andy.
So I receive emails through the week through the ESV Bible thing, and sometimes there's some quite useful articles that come in. And the one that came in during this week was, are you despairing at the culture around you or the world around you? And I thought, well, yes, I am. So I will read this at some point when I have a moment. And I read it, and he said, the author said that potentially one of the roots of the despair is also the thing that the culture is teaching us, which is that we see everything through the lens of, what will give me satisfaction now? What will serve me within my lifespan? What gives me the best life? And I'm sure you've heard this picture before, but he used the example of cathedrals. And one cathedral in particular that was designed, commissioned in the 1200s and not finished until the 19th century. So it's like 700-800 years of work that people put into that. And it's amazing to think that the architect at the beginning of that journey and the stonemasons went, we're going to start a journey that is going to be completed long after our lifetime. And I've definitely been guilty in the last few years of seeking quick fixes in my life, things that will give me satisfaction now, and also despairing over, my choices and what's happened in this moment. And I thought, wow, what if I expand my garden? I'll take that as a metaphor. What if I expand my garden and ask the question, how are my actions properly affecting my neighbours? How are they affecting the children that are here? How are they contributing to relationships? And how about if I broaden it and I also extend it in terms of length of time? And I say, hey, not today, not tomorrow, and perhaps not even in my lifetime. And I wonder if we think about our relationships, about the questions we're asking ourselves, how many of those are shaped by short-term goals? How are your actions affecting your children? How are they affecting your family? How are they affecting the community that we have here? And how can we broaden and deepen our investment? So, there we go.
Thanks, Andy. I find that such an inspiring image of laying that first stone in a cathedral that is going to take generations to build. And I'm really moved by the activity of that, actually, that there could be a pull to say, well, there's no point in I'll leave it till tomorrow, or maybe we'll start next year because it's going to take 900 years, so why do we do anything? But I think what you're offering, Andy, is something really active, and say, no, today I'm going to do something that is going to affect other people further down the line.
Absolutely.
Nikki.
So this has kind of been talked about already, but something that really stood out to me was, Rupert, when you said in, I think, one of your first sermons, that we come from a tradition that says if we read scripture and we don't get something from it, it's not working. And that sort of felt like you were talking to me, because I just felt like that is something that I've struggled with for a while. And I'm not so much a sporty person, so like the training idea, I'm like, yeah, I get that, but I haven't done too much like training in my life. But I think about more like practice. I'm an illustrator, so just kind of practicing my art over the years. Or even just relationships. I think about moving to a new city. As an introvert, I much prefer the part of relationships where we're already comfortable with each other, and it's not the getting to know you, guessing, small talk sort of phase. And I think what's encouraging about just the way you guys have talked about that, or how you put it, Rupert, I think I've heard the term like fake it till you make it. And the thing about that, or the thing about how I've tried to do that and how some traditions I've come from in the past, it's kind of like, well, just try harder and then it'll work. And so it seems, I guess I've come to this, when I come to the scripture and I don't feel like I get anything out of it, I'm like, I guess I'm doing what I should be. Maybe there's something wrong with me, or maybe my connection with God isn't like as strong as it should be. But just this idea of like looking at my art practice, and there are definitely times where my skill wasn't where I wanted it to be, but I knew if I kept trying, it would get there someday. Or like looking at new relationships, I'm like, I'm not as comfortable with this person or not as close with this person as I would like to be, but I know if I continue to have small conversations with them, continue to get to know them, eventually we'll become friends, hopefully, or I'll get to know them better. That has made me think more about, it's not necessarily the, like, trying extra hard each time. It's like putting in the daily work. And those small little steps eventually yield big results. And that's just been really encouraging to me, because it's felt like, well, I guess I'm doing what I should be, but it's not. I would maybe, going back to a training metaphor, I would try overly hard and maybe sprain something. And then it's like, well, forget it. Now I can't do anything because I'm injured in some senses. So, yeah, that was just really encouraging. I was like, oh, yeah, I definitely thought that if I've come to the scripture, I didn't feel a huge thing, or like something really stood out to me, so something must be wrong with me, because other people come to the scripture and just talk about this great experience, and I'm like, huh? So that was great for me.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm struck by, on the surface, this idea of fake it till you make it and this idea of training could look quite similar. We could say, oh, that's the same thing, but they're totally different. It's totally different, because using the example of your illustration, actually that training or that practice enables you to be a more authentic illustrator. It enables you to express something that you couldn't have done without that daily habit. And I remembered last week, Rupert, you talked about the feeling that sometimes we want our spiritual life to be like someone else's. We look at someone else and say, oh, I need to be like so-and-so over there. And then you moved on to talk about upstream practices. And I thought, is that That's not the same. Is that the same thing? Because you're doing something that doesn't feel very comfortable, but it's totally a different thing because you're not saying, oh, I'm not good enough, I need to be like somebody else. It's a recognition that putting in this effort or this activity enables me to be in touch with my true self in a way that I can't do by just doing the easy thing. And actually it's a life-giving activity, not a shaming, I need to hide and be somebody I'm not.
You've just said that so much better than I did last week, so why weren't you speaking? Just while Stephen comes up, can I just read something from Farah, which I think is actually quite connecting with what Nikki says. So Farah says on Zoom, in our group, we spoke about consistent practices and how those are more impactful than big, maybe unrealistic intentions. And for 1 week, we set a practice that we thought we could actually commit to. For example, mine was watching one short video from the Bible Project every day. And we checked in the next week, and we all did feel we'd started investing in our spiritual lives more, even if it wasn't necessarily a big dramatic thing that we were doing on the outside. I think that stayed with me because it drove home the importance of daily living a spiritual life, even in small ways.
Yeah, something that is done is always better than something that isn't done. You know, even if it feels something really insignificant, it can really shape us. And the Bible Project was a great choice for a spiritual practice, I think. I mean, the Bible Project has, I think, shaped my faith significantly over the last couple of years. It's a really helpful resource.
Yeah, absolutely.
Stephen.
Thanks for introducing me. The last time I spoke, when I went home at lunchtime, my kids said, "Dad, will you stop saying your name every time you say something in church?"
Everybody, this is Stephen. Or Dr. Meldrum.
I have found the Dust series incredibly rich. So, yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for it. I found the idea of apprenticeship and followership and disciple of Jesus really, really helpful for me. And I've been thinking about that apprenticeship idea of being, as an apprentice, being with the person, watching the person, following the person, trying to be like the person. And I thought about it for weeks until I realized that analogy falls down on one level. And it's that the aim of an apprentice is to finally be independent of the person that they're watching and they're being with. And that's like never the way. And I really felt this important thing happening. And then Naomi spoke a couple of weeks ago on childlikeness and us being a child. And I got this beautiful picture of us being an apprentice of Jesus, watching Jesus, being with him, wanting to be like him, growing to be more and more like Jesus, and at the same time being completely dependent on God like a child is, with the view of never trying to become independent. And those things almost are juxtapositioned and almost seem contradictory, but I don't think they are. And I left a couple of weeks ago with the question of childlikeness, being a child. What does it mean for me to be like a child? I don't want to be childish. I want to be like a child. And about an hour after being home, one of my kids just looked really down and sad, and I didn't know what the problem was at all. And I stood in front of her and I said, "What can I do to make your life better this afternoon?" And I didn't mean like buy her an aisle of chocolate from Tesco or give her £1,000. I just went, it was like, do you want to walk? Do you want to talk? Do you want a hug? Like, how can I make your life better this afternoon? And within about 10 seconds of those words leaving my mouth, there was almost a wave, I believe, from the Lord of, "Stephen, that's what it is to be like a child. Will you receive from me the stuff you expect your children to receive from you?" When you say to your children, "How can I make your life better?" and expect them to respond to that, will you as a child respond in the same way to me? And it's happened on 3 occasions in the last fortnight. I've said something And then within about 10 seconds, got this wave of, that's it, Stephen, that's the stuff you've got to respond to. So I'm just going to read them out to you. These are 3 things. It seems a bit disingenuous quoting yourself. But that's what I'm going to do. So these are 3 things that I've said, not anticipating the follow-up of that's what it is to be like a child. So these are the things that I've said to my own children that the Lord's prompting me, I believe, to receive from him. So the first one I've already said to you is, what can I do to make your life better this afternoon? The second one, when one of them had really hurt themselves, was, squeeze me as hard as you want, I can take it. And the third one, when one of them looked skeptical about something I was saying, was, seriously, just trust me on this. So that's a little glimpse into my journey of becoming more like a child.
Thanks, Stephen. I'm reminded of a quote by I think it's C.S. Lewis, who says, when I became an adult, I put away childish things, including the wish to be very grown up. It's this idea that children always want to be grown up, don't they? They want to be independent. They want to, and that's part of our growing up in faith, is realizing we don't have to do that because we can open ourselves up to just trust me, squeeze as hard as you want, I can take it. And how can I make your life better this afternoon? How can I bring you healing or hope or wholeness or thank you? Yeah. In a minute, we're going to come back to extended time of sung worship, but is there maybe one more person sat there going, shall I, shan't I, shall I, shan't I? Yes. Thanks, Paul.
So this one, this is going back, possibly about this time last month, actually. I shared something on Facebook. Some of you may have seen it or not. I quite often post random things up on Facebook. But it was when Andy was talking about the kind of instant fix, kind of, we want it now, we want it yesterday, we want it. And Rupert was talking about our practices and kind of how we want to be more Jesus-like, but that's not going to happen. Like, he's not going to like wave a magic wand and that's it, ta-da. And one thing I quite often do on a Sunday afternoon, and it's probably rubbish, is I go home and ITV2, it's guaranteed you're like 3 movies. It's either The Minions, Bruce Almighty, or something else. And that afternoon, it was actually Evan Almighty, the follow-up one. And I was really struck by what Morgan Freeman, great guy. If God's anything like Morgan Freeman, it's brilliant. I don't know how that fits in, and I'll move swiftly on. But he said, let me ask you something. If someone prays for patience, do you think God gives them patience? Or does he give them the opportunity to be patient? If they pray for courage, does God give them courage or the opportunity to be courageous? And if someone prays for their family to be closer, do you think God zaps them with warm, fuzzy feelings? Or does he give them the opportunities to love each other? And I was just really struck by, are we praying for God to kind of fix stuff and make everything how we think it should be? Or are we praying for God to say, look, I can't do this on my own. Give me the opportunity to accept what you have for us and help us along with it. So, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. The warm and fuzzy feelings are great, aren't they? But God is interested in more than that. Just before the band brings us back to worship, I wonder what you've heard over the last 20 minutes or so. Because the Spirit is at work in our community. And we hear God through Scripture, we hear God through a sermon, and we hear God through each other. So just take 30 seconds to think about, what have you heard God say to our community, through our community this morning? and then we'll come into worship.